Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my fight analyzations and my fight reviews and breakdowns of the four fights that at least I had broken down, kind of yesterday in my fight analyzations and in my fight predictions. And finally, I ended up going 4-0, I believe, on the fight card. Of course, the fights that I ended up predicting were that of Abraham Nova versus Raymond Ford, Filip Hrgovic versus David Adeleye, Moses Itauma versus Dillian Whyte, and of course, Nick Ball versus Sam Goodman. This was a very, very good card, especially if you're from that of the European region or that of the quote unquote British region. But of course, there was also, some other good fights on here as well, especially with that of the very talented American fighter Raymond Ford. Of course, it would have been a more interesting fight had he fought Kakashi, I believe, that one Irish fighter, but unfortunately, of course, he had to pull out due to injury or illness or whatever it was. But, anyways, that being stated, I'm going to talk about that of the main event fight, and then we're going to go, all along the other fights, and kind of what I seen. But the fights pretty much went down how I all thought they were going to go. But, anyways, the first fight, of course, with that of Moses Itauma versus that of Dillian Whyte. Moses Itauma, for those of you that did not hear the news, not only was he able to get the stoppage over Dillian Whyte, which many people, including myself, had predicted, but he ended up getting it within that of the first round. And I did state within my little fight prediction that although I predict that he's going to get the stoppage somewhere within the first 5 rounds, I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up seeing a knockout within the first or second round, and that's exactly what happened. It just was very obvious that, first of all, that not only is Moses Itauma more than likely the best up-and-coming talented heavyweight of this new up-and-coming generation, and he's someone that has a great solid foundation of skills and someone that is a great all-around fighter, but he's someone that pretty much has it all. He has great athleticism, great speed, great power. He's someone that has great skills. He's someone that is a highly intelligent boxer, at least so far from what we've seen. Dillian Whyte, even at his absolute best, I'm not quite sure if I would have favored him to win this fight anyways. But I mean, the thing is that Dillian Whyte has never really been the same fighter after he got knocked out against Tyson Fury. He just wasn't. It was obvious for any of us that had watched him within his most recent fights, within his past few fights. He's not been the same fighter. He's been very clearly, more slow. He's been someone that, has even been a little bit more tactically, a little bit more sloppy than even usual. And it was just very apparent in this fight that he just wasn't the same fighter. Now, that being stated, is this still a very decent win, especially for the early portion of your career? Only having, I believe, about 13 total fights in your career? Absolutely. But that being stated, is this necessarily a win that I would count as an A plus level win, or even debatably an A grade level win? I mean, maybe if you wanted to debate A minus, you could, but Dillian Whyte was someone that wasn't quite the same fighter as what he once was. So I mean, to me, it's anywhere from B to A minus. I probably would give it more of a B, although certain people would disagree. But Dillian Whyte is someone that really is just not the same fighter anymore. And because he's not someone that ever had a great technical foundation, he does make a certain amount of mistakes, and he's not someone that is the sharpest of fighters. Dillian Whyte has to be at his absolute athletic peak in order to stand a chance in certain fights like these. So it just is what it is. But as for Moses Itauma, let me state, there's been a lot of news about how good this guy actually is. Is he the next up-and-coming heavyweight? Is he even possibly the guy that could give Alexander Usyk right now, debatably the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world of boxing? In my personal view, he is. And someone overall that, of course, is the unified champion right now. Is Moses Itauma the guy to give that great amount of trouble to that of an Alexander Usyk? And it's very possible if Alexander Usyk at least decides to stay around. Now, that being stated, what I will state is this. For those of you, of course, that have watched my channel, but not just my channel, you know that there are many politics within that of the sport of boxing, including that of racial politics. And one side, you have certain fighters, or excuse me, certain boxing fans that may not like that of black fighters or that of the black fan base. And then another side, you have, the LDBC and the media that, of course, don't like that of non-black fighters or that of the non-black fan base. And it basically becomes this war of, I'm going to try and degrade, this personal fan base because I don't want them to be remembered as some of the greatest boxers of all time. And it's also, you're going to see a lot of that with the up-and-coming Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Bud Crawford fight as well. But recently I had a video where I reviewed a video by that of a channel named Bruce M.F. Vane, and I had some comments, thinking that I was just overall going just after black content creators, or that I was just going overall after some of these LDBC and new media channels. But if you hear my video, once again, I've also explained that there are other channels that I've also held accountable, such as BDA Boxing and, of course, that of Fight Film and some other guys. But the point overall is this. While one side, of course, the reason why I mentioned this is because one of the comments in my comment section for my most recent video, when I was talking about that, and is Canelo Alvarez too old video, one of the comments overall was stating is that, well, you got Bruce MF Vane wrong. Alexander Usyk is his, favorite fighter and all sort of stuff. Right, but if you take a look at one of his more recent videos, Alexander Usyk is a fighter that gets a lot of credit until you start to compare him to certain fighters like a Muhammad Ali or some of the greatest black fighters of all time. Then all of a sudden it starts to go very downhill from there. Then all of a sudden he fought in the weakest heavyweight era and all this other stuff. So my point being is this. What does this have to relate to with Moses Itauma? Channels like Dante's Boxing Nation, Aki TV, and those guys, what they're going to do is that they're going to use Moses Itauma as a political pawn, and they're going to use him as a political figure. So what are they going to try to do? What they're going to try to do, at least certain channels like a Dante or an Aki TV, is that they're going to claim that Moses Itauma is now a part of the newer talented generation, the more talented generation, that Usyk really didn't fight any, one in his generation, and that he beat a quote-unquote dead and weak heavyweight division, which, of course, for any of us that had watched that heavyweight division, knows that definitely that is not the case. That is not the truth. But that's what they're going to try to state. And Moses Itauma, he has 13 fights, but he's still not someone right now that probably is going to get a title shot. So what are they going to state? They're going to claim that Alexander Usyk, that he's quote-unquote ducking that of a Moses Itauma. So once again, keep an eye out for that, especially from these LDBC and new media channels, because that's exactly what they're going to start doing. Now, don't get it twisted. Are there certain other channels, non-black content creators, not from the LDBC and not from new media, that also do that with black fighters as well? Yes, obviously, of course. But the reason why I bring this up right now, especially these channels, is because this is in relation to Moses Itauma. And that's overall, once again, why they're going to do it. And once again, Alexander Usyk gets a certain amount of credit for them, all until you start to place him in the top 10, the top 20 fighters of all time. Then all of a sudden, all bets are off, and they'll tell you what they truly think about Alexander Usyk, because they're fine with Usyk getting credit, but if he starts to replace certain fighters in the top 10 list, that's when they start to have a problem. Because what a lot of these LDBC and new media, channels are afraid of, as well as also as the non, new media channels are afraid of, it's basically a huge race and political war. So on one side, if you have the fan base or that certain channels are against black fighters, they'll basically state overall that, for example, the up-and-coming Canelo versus Crawford fight, they basically tried to diminish any great black fighter because they don't want them, any new black fighters to be in the top 10 of all time. They want certain non-black fighters to diminish the black greatness of the top 10 list or the top 20 list of all time. But the same thing goes for the LDBC and new media. But while you might have, overall those racist or those racial fans that don't want fighters like a Crawford or certain fighters like that remembered as top 10 level boxers of all time because they want to try to take the throne or diminish overall the black level of dominance, the LDBC new media channels, they're very similar. And they're overall, once again, they go against a lot of non-black fighters such as Usyk and Canelo in a way because they know that if that fighter or if one of those fighters are remembered as the clear best of their day, what does that mean? It means overall that they'll be starting to be remembered as some of the top 10 to top 20 fighters of all time. And what that means is that some of those other fighters, some of those great black fighters, like a Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roy Jones Jr., those guys, one of those guys is going to have to go. And that diminishes the black dominance overall of the top 10 or top 20 pound per pound list of all time. So that's why anytime one of those fighters, they get to the debatable number one pound per pound spot, that's when all of a sudden they start to have a problem with them. They'll give them credit before then, but once it gets to that point, then all of a sudden a lot of those guys, especially the LDBC and new media guys, that's when they start to degrade fighters like that of an Alexander Usyk, because they realize that if Usyk or if Inoue or Canelo are remembered as the best fighters of their generation, or if one of those guys are remembered as the number one pound per pound fighter of their generation, that one of those guys in the top 10 or top 20 is going to have to go, and they don't want that. So the point is that, that's exactly overall what both sides are afraid of. They both, one wants to keep the crown, while another one, of course, wants to overthrow that personal crown. So that's what it's about. But once again, I'm not here for the political bullshit. I like to break it down sometimes because I can see overall the narratives. But once again, watch out for that because the LDBC and new media channels, they will be using Moses Itauma for a political figure against that of an Alexander Usyk. I have no doubt about that in my mind. But anyways, that being stated, congratulations to Moses Itauma. Great fighter. Someone that, in my personal view, will be a huge threat for a lot of the fighters to come. And there's a lot of great young talent in the heavyweight division right now. Not even just still some of the great contenders like that of a Joseph Parker or Martin McCauley or some of those other guys. But Moses Itauma, Fabio Wardley, Filip Hrgovic, to a certain degree, although I think he's a little bit overrated, but, it is what it is. He's still a great talent. David Adeleye, although he pretty much proved that, he cannot last, to an extreme degree against the elite level fighters, so I mean, it is what it is. But we have a lot of great up and coming talent, and it should be very interesting to see where they go from here. But that being said, congratulations to Mr. Moses Itauma. He did pretty much everything I thought he was going to do in the fight. I predicted that he was going to be a bit too sharp, a bit too athletic, and just a little bit too good for an aging and older version of Dillian Whyte. But in terms of those channels that will be pushing the political game, I will be reviewing certain videos because there's no doubt in my mind that is what they're going to try to push. So we'll see overall what ends up happening. But anyways, that being stated, let's now go to the second fight of the night, Nick Ball versus Sam Goodman. Now, many people, of course, stated that this fight, in their personal view, was a fight that could have went either way, or that this fight was very close. Just my personal view of it, I don't really think that that fight was that particularly close. I thought that the judges got it right. I thought that Nick Ball, just in my view, won 9 rounds to 3. I thought the commentary was awful. I thought that the commentary was trying to make the fight way closer than what it actually seemed. There were certain rounds that definitely were tighter, or certain rounds that, were close, as both fighters were throwing to a similar degree. But all the impactful punches, all the damaging shots were clearly Nick Ball. And this is why I state you cannot always just rely on that of the punch stats, because the punch stats might tell you that the fight is super close, right? But who is landing the more cleaner and the more impactful punches? You have to go with that fighter. And that's why so many people, they were surprised that, Nick Ball ended up winning to such a wide degree. I wasn't surprised because I had that same exact score. But the fight ended up going pretty much how I thought that it was going to go. Once again, I questioned Sam Goodman's ability on the back foot, and he fought a little bit on the back foot, but what Sam Goodman showed me is that pretty much what my suspicion was, if he was going to be pushed on that of the back foot, he was going to have a little bit of problems because that's just not his style. That's not what he's used to. And then on top of that, Nick Ball is the stronger guy. He's more adjusted to 126 because Sam Goodman formerly was only at 122. And he's a guy that doesn't have the worst amount of power, but he doesn't have enough power to really threaten that of a Nick Ball, at least consistently. Someone that is very powerful and someone that, although small in stature and really is more of a natural 122-pounder himself, like that of a Sam Goodman, he's someone that is deceptively strong. Is he someone that is the most multidimensional fighter that I've ever seen? Does he have all his I's dotted and all his T's crossed? No. But he's someone that does get the job done. He has a lot of passion. He has a lot of heart. And he's someone that, is never going to quit in the fight. At certain times, he does end up getting a little bit more tired because he just throws his all a little bit too much in the fight. But I thought that he hurt Goodman more. I thought that he very clearly landed the more impactful shots. And I just thought that he clearly was the winner. I don't know what the commentary was seeing in my personal view. I don't know if they had an agenda against Nick Ball, or maybe they were just more excited about the fight and wanted it to be closer than what, it was. But it wasn't really that close. I thought that Nick Ball very clearly won 9 rounds to 3. I thought Sam Goodman maybe won about 3-4 rounds at the most. And I think that 2 out of the 3 judges ended up getting it right. I don't really think that it was that competitive. But once again, that goes to show you why so many people were surprised. Once again, most people don't know how to score a boxing fight. I had the exact same scores as 2 out of the 3 judges and what they had. Somewhere around that 9 rounds to 3 mark. Those are the judges, in my personal view, that ended up getting it correctly. Nick Ball, definitely, it wasn't his most flawless performance, but it still was a performance to where he still was clearly winning the fight. He was just landing too impactfully. Sam Goodman was inside the range a little bit too much, and he clearly wasn't able to handle his level of size and power to the same degree that he handled other fighters. And when Nick Ball did push him back, he did have some problems. And he also does not move his head off the center line quite enough. All factors that I thought were going to be an impact, and they absolutely were. Now, had Sam Goodman been someone that, for his 20-something fights had, let's say, 17 knockouts and someone that had legit A-grade level power, then I would have been a little bit more worried for that of a Nick Ball. But he's not someone that has this A-grade level of power. He does not change levels to the greatest of degrees, so he can be hit. Although Ball is someone that, a high guard definitely can be a problem. If you use it in an effective way, it can be an effective tool. And it was with Nick Ball tonight. Sam Goodman just was not able to get through to Nick Ball, enough. And Nick Ball now has wins over guys like Raymond Ford and Sam Goodman. And some people would debate that he even deserved the win over that of a Ray Vargas. So although Nick Ball definitely has some faults and he's not someone that is the most technically skilled fighter that I've ever seen, he's certainly an A-grade level fighter. And this is why when I counted, stated about Inoue that, one of the ways for Inoue to be number one pound per pound fighter, or the number one pound per pound fighter, would be to beat guys like Junto Nakatani, Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, and Nick Ball. And certain people said, well, why Nick Ball? Why overall? Is it that? Because Nick Ball has had a draw against two top-of-the-line guys at 126. He had a draw over, I believe, Ray Vargas, and he had a win over that of a Raymond Ford. Guys that were clearly bigger than him, but he still was able to beat them because of his boxing ability and just what he brings to the table. And then now he was able to defeat the undefeated and very talented Sam Goodman, someone that you could debate is around an A- level fighter. So, the point overall is that Nick Ball, I think, deserves a lot of credit. I don't think he gets some of the credit that he actually deserves. Will he beat that of an Naoya Inoue? I'm not really quite sure about that. I definitely think that Inoue is more technically and tactically sound than that of a Nick Ball. That being stated, could I see Inoue possibly losing the fight? It's possible. At times, Inoue does stay on the inside a little bit too long, and I am wondering, how that fight would turn out, because if Nick Ball, who is great at slipping in punches between that high guard, if Inoue stays inside the high guard a little bit too long, it's possible that maybe Nick Ball could drop him or that he at least could overwhelm him. But I would assume that more than likely Inoue, because he has great power himself. He is someone that has extraordinary level power. But that being stated, Inoue is, someone that if we take a look at his last fight against Roman Cardenas, he definitely did not look like the same fighter. And the reason why I claim that is not because he's still, in my view, not at a peak level, but Roman Cardenas was someone that was a legit 126 pounder. You could tell that, Roman Cardenas was a different size, and weight than what Inoue had ever fought before. And although on the surface, maybe most people couldn't tell, you could tell overall for those of us that have an educated eye that Inoue did not look like the same fighter in that fight because he really was fighting a 126 pounder in there. And when you fight up in a weight class, you don't have the same level of power. You don't overall have the same level of ability at times or the same level of dominance. That's just normal. So I do wonder if Inoue against Nick Ball, someone that definitely pushes the pedal to the metal, is it possible that he can beat Inoue? It's definitely possible. I don't think that I would favor him. I think that I would have Inoue as the 3-1 or the 2-1 favorite. But if Nick Ball somehow ended up pulling out of that fight, I wouldn't be surprised. He's someone that, overall is probably around the same size as Inoue, but he has been adjusted to that weight class. And he also has a level of, body power and torque and, a certain level of style that I don't think Inoue has ever seen before. So it would definitely be a very, very interesting fight. I'd love to see the fight. And I hope that that's one of Inoue's next 3 fights. The next 2 fights that I hope to see Inoue in, after Akhmadaliev, of course, assuming that he wins that fight, I would love to see Junto Nakatani next, and I would love to see Nick Ball. Those are the 2 fights that I would love to see. But anyways, that being stated, that fight pretty much went down how I thought that it was going to go, with Nick Ball winning by that of a unanimous decision. So I'm not really surprised off of that, but Sam Goodman definitely had his moments. But let's now go on to that of the next fight. I believe that of Raymond Ford versus Abraham Nova, and then I'll talk about Filip Hrgovic versus David Adeleye. But anyways, for that of the Raymond Ford versus Abraham Nova fight, and before I move on to that, let me also explain this, because certain people may be a little bit confused. In regards to that of the Nick Ball versus Naoya Inoue fight, I would have Inoue as a favorite in the fight, because I may have certain people that come on here and say, what are you talking about? Inoue is the clear favorite. Nick Ball isn't anywhere near close to him. And in terms of a technical prowess, I would agree. Inoue, in my personal view, is one of the top 5 to top 3 most technically gifted fighters, and one of the top 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the world today, at least in my personal opinion. But what I will state is this: he is going to be moving up a weight class that he's not used to, and on top of that, Nick Ball is someone that is very strong. And not only body-wise, but he's someone overall that is very powerful. So in a way, would definitely have to be on his A game, use his speed to his advantage. Maybe he might benefit overall from gaining a little bit of weight in that fight. He might, because it may not take too much away from his speed to gain about maybe 5 to 7 pounds, in terms of a little bit of muscle mass. And then on top of that, overall, you're going to have the speed more than likely in the fight. But on top of that, maybe gain a little bit more power than what you already have. Because I do believe that he can beat Nick Ball to the punch, but he does need to be a little bit careful, as kind of seen in the Roman Cardenas fight, not to take too much punishment on the inside, and not to just stand there and let Nick Ball get through his high guard, which we did see a little bit with Roman Cardenas. But of course, I would expect a better and more technical version of Inoue in that fight. But anyways, that being stated, let's now move on to that of the Raymond Ford or the Ray Ford versus Abraham Nova fight, which, in terms of the scores, I had it basically what they did. I believe that 2 out of the 3 judges ended up having it 97-93, which I think would have made it 7 rounds to 3 in a 10-round fight. Of course, unfortunately, it's unfortunate that we didn't get to see the title fight. That would have been a very interesting fight. But Abraham Nova, although he did take this fight on short notice, and he does have a few losses in his career, anyone who knows anything about Abraham Nova knows that whenever he comes to fight, he comes to bring it. And he gave tough fights to some even great undefeated champions or great undefeated prospects in the world of boxing. I believe in even one of the top American guys, I believe his name is Oshiko Foster or something like that. He ended up overall giving him a very tough fight as well, where I think that it was a split decision, but Foster, I think, ended up just pulling out of that fight. But, the short notice did impact him a little bit, pretty much what I had predicted. And on top of that, Raymond Ford, although he did show some of the same faults, I believe that I had one person ask me in my comment section, who do you think would win between that of a Raymond Ford and a Nick Ball in a rematch? Well, I'm not really quite sure. And I don't think that I don't know if it's really going to be that relevant, because I don't see Ray Ford ever moving back down to 126, and I don't see Nick Ball moving up to 130. So I don't know if we're ever going to see that rematch. But the reason why Ray Ford, in my view, lost that first fight, and I kind of seen the same fault here, sometimes he just lets the other opponent work a little bit too much. He'll stay up against the ropes a little bit too much, let them work off a little bit. He'll let them stay inside his range a little bit. And although he's very defensively sound, and he's someone that a lot of the times can even make the punches not land, even if he is staying inside the range, the point is that if you're staying inside that range a lot of the times and letting your opponent get off, then the judges will take a look at that as points, because they don't always know what punches are landing and what punches are not. And if they're hearing big, impactful shots, big slaps, big, slamming shots, and they don't know necessarily what's landing, they're going to assume that at least some of those shots are landing. So sometimes volume, even if you're not landing, the more impactful shots, if the other fighter is not throwing enough and just letting that other fighter get off on them too much in terms of punches and volume, the other fighter can end up winning the fight, which is a part of the reason why Nick Ball won that first fight. But I also think that he clearly landed the more impactful shots and was just busier. But Raymond Ford, overall, as I predicted, he was going to be a bit busier in this fight. He did make some adjustments, but he still does have some of the same problems. So it'll be very interesting to see how he competes against some of the best at 130, to see how he competes against the guy that really will pressure him. Kakashi is someone that I believe overall does like the pressure, so it'll be interesting to see if that fight does end up happening next. We'll see. Raymond Ford, in my view, is someone that for those weight classes is around an A- level fighter, but I'm not really quite sure if he's anything above that. He's someone that when I take a look at him, does he come across to me as elite of an elite Black American prospect as someone like what a Jerron Boots Ennis was, or what a Shakur Stevenson was, or some of those other guys were? No. He's someone that, in my view, kind of comes across as, peak level potential, maybe a bit better than that of a Robert Easter. So he's someone that, might be an A-grade level fighter, but he's not someone, in my view, that's ever going to be the particular best, of the world. He might be the particular best of that weight class, but we'll have to see. There's definitely a lot, of big fish to get through in that weight class at the current moment in time, at least for someone like a Raymond Ford. But that being stated, overall, I thought that he clearly did enough to win the fight over that of Abraham Nova. Abraham Nova had his, tough moments. I thought that he won about 3 rounds out of the 10-round fight. He had his tough moments, but he just wasn't as sharp as what he needed to be. And on top of that, he's someone that can just get hit a little bit too often, stay inside the range a bit too much, admire, his own work a bit too much, or at least what I'll personally state is that he kind of just, stays inside the range a bit too much and does not, use defensive tactics well enough in order to get outside the range. And what I mean by that is that he doesn't really move outside of the zone very well. He'll throw certain punches and then let his opponents dictate the pace and kind of stay within the range, and that allows his opponents to get off a few more combinations or punches than what they really need to. So that was a part of the reason why I also picked Raymond Ford to win this fight, as he had the superior feet and quicker feet in my personal view, and the better tactics for that type of fight. And also, Abraham Nova is someone that at times can just advertise his offense a little bit too much, which is also what I said in my fight prediction. And that's also what I seen within this fight as well. So I ended up predicting Raymond Ford to win the fight. Wasn't surprised at all that he won. Congratulations to him. The question will be, can he continue onwards and win the belts at 130? We'll see. There's definitely a lot of big fish there. And if Lamont Roach ends up going back down there, Oshiko Foster, some of these other guys, champions or not, there's going to be a lot of guys for him to get past. So we'll have to see how good he really is. I would love to see him fight Kakashi or, O Foster or Lamont Roach. I'm not quite sure, if I would favor him over any of those guys, but I'm not sure if I would not favor him either. We'll see. It'll be a very, very interesting fight, but he might need a little bit more experience first before he really starts to, compete with some of these guys. Maybe a fight against, someone like that of a Hector Garcia if he's still there, and maybe a Chris Colbert or, something like that, Chris Colbert, whatever his name is, one of those fighters down there. But anyways, congrats to Ray Ford. That's pretty much all I have to say about him. I did see some of the same issues once again, like I've always seen. Him staying inside the zone a bit too much, him not using enough lateral foot movement, and him just staying inside the range a bit too often. But we'll see how he improves. We're not really going to know how good he actually is until he faces another legit A-grade level fighter like that of a Nick Bull. And he kind of lost to a fighter that really had a massive size disadvantage against him. So let's see how he continues forward. We'll see if he makes any improvements. He doesn't come across to me as someone that is exceptional, but he is exceptionally talented. There's certain fighters that are exceptionally talented or have great talent, but they're not an exceptional level fighter. Demetrius Andrade, in my personal view, was someone that was another one of those fighters. Now, I think that Andrade is definitely on a different level compared to that of a Ford. I think that he's someone that was a lot better. But, there are certain fighters that get hyped up because of the amount of talent that they have, especially physically. But then, when they finally get in the ring with A-grade level fighters, they don't really show out that well. I've seen it. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But anyways, that being stated, that's pretty much about it for Raymond Ford. Let's now go on to the last fight, which I believe was the Filip Hrgovic versus David Adeleye fight, where I predicted Filip Hrgovic, I believe, to either win by ladder stoppage or unanimous decision. So now for the last fight, of course, I'm going to be talking about Filip Hrgovic versus that, I believe, of David Adeleye. Now, of course, the question about Filip Hrgovic as of recent, which have been very apropos, there's been relevant criticisms of Filip Hrgovic as of late, as he has shown oftentimes to get hit a bit too much. And I've always stated this about Hrgovic. He is not someone that moves his head particularly well. He does not move his head off the center line, nor change levels to an elite level degree. And on top of that, he does not have that good of a gas tank. We've seen that against Zhang. We've seen that a little bit against Joe Joyce, but we especially seen it against that of a Danny Dubois, where eventually the fight was forced to be stopped, I believe, because of a cut over Filip Hrgovic's eye. And the same cut, I believe, ended up happening in this fight early on in the fight against David Adeleye. But the reason why I predicted Filip Hrgovic to win this fight, although I stated that this was a fight that I wouldn't be surprised if it went either way, is because the one big fight that I seen David Adeleye in, although he can punch very hard and he's skilled and he's someone that in certain areas is more talented than a Hrgovic, Hrgovic is around the same amount of talent as a David Adeleye, if not more. And on top of that, he's someone that has an even better gas tank than that of a David Adeleye. I remember David Adelaye's performance over that of a Fabio Wardley, and I was expecting a little bit better from that of a David Adeleye, but it was just very obvious, even in the early part of that fight, that he had no gas tank. David Adeleye literally has no stamina whatsoever, none. He's someone that, basically tires out within that of the first 3 or 4 rounds. And Filip Hrgovic, one thing I'll say about him is this. He's not someone overall that has the best of gas tanks, but he does throw a lot in certain fights. Sometimes I can get him in trouble, but he is someone that is decently technically sound. He has a great 1-2. He has a great right hand, a great jab, where eventually he did knock down David Adeleye a little bit later on down in the fight. I think it was like in the 9th round. And Adeleye is very lucky that he did not get stopped, within this fight. But Filip Hrgovic is someone, of course, as you've seen, David Adeleye fought back in the round, damn near knocked Hrgovic down because Hrgovic, once again, he doesn't move very particularly well. And on top of that, he's someone that does not have a great gas tank. But once again, Adeleye, certain people may be surprised that he didn't really let his hands go. I'm not really surprised because that's not the fighter that David Adeleye is. He does not have a great gas tank. He has to work off of accuracy and work off of moving around. And I thought that eventually that Filip Hrgovic, because of his experience, and on top of that also with his skill set and the amount of volume that he was going to throw, that he was eventually going to slow down Adeleye, whether Adeleye started early or started late. And I think that he tried to conserve stamina, but he just did not have enough. And eventually he was going to be forced to throw, and basically that's exactly what happened. And Filip Hrgovic, of course they praised his stamina. I don't think that Filip Hrgovic's stamina really looked that good in this fight. But I did claim in my fight prediction for anyone that paid attention that Filip Hrgovic, or people that don't have good stamina, if you're fighting a fighter that also does not have good stamina, or someone that doesn't throw that much, their stamina is going to look better as a result. Because, they can just kind of get off on throwing on you and land more without having to, worry about certain things in return. So they don't wear down as much. So Filip Hrgovic was able to beat that of David Adeleye relatively easily in my personal view. I wasn't surprised whatsoever because, once again, Adeleye is a very talented fighter, but he has no gas tank whatsoever. And he was able to get some recent knockouts, look very good against some bums, but, it really didn't show me anything of what he was able to do against true top level competition, and also how he really does in the trenches. Beating some bums in the first, or in the first 5 or 6 rounds, that doesn't really tell me anything. What tells me something is when you have a big fight and how you react to that fight. Now, maybe if David Adeleye had beaten someone like, I don't know, maybe like a Carlos Takam or something like that, when Carlos Takam was at his best, or someone overall that was a very decent contender, and he won a full, 10 to 12 rounds against them and showed that he actually has some stamina, maybe I could have picked David Adeleye in this fight. But as I predicted, David Adeleye had never been in the trenches really before, other than Fabio Wardley. And the one time that he was in the trenches, he showed me everything that I needed to see. He has no stamina. He's someone that is a very talented fighter, but he will wear down as the fight progresses, and he does get hit a bit too often as well. He's very talented, but is he ever someone that is ever going to be a championship level fighter? More than likely not. We'll see what ends up happening. I think that he is talented, but he's going to have to really work on his gas tank if he ever wants to be something in the sport. If not, then he's more than likely never going to do shit. Because both times that he was in the trenches, he looked like shit. It just is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I pretty much, got all the fights correct down to a T. And I'm really happy that finally I went 4-0 on the card, because there's always usually at least one fight where they either scored incorrect, or the fighter ends up getting an upset. So I'm glad that I went 4-0 on this card. But the fights pretty much went down how I thought that they were going to go down. So congratulations to all the victors. We'll see where Moses Itauma goes from here. I would love to see Moses Itauma in a fight, against certain guys, maybe like that of a Martin Bakole, or maybe like that of a Danny Dubois. I would love to see a fight between Itauma and that of a Danny Dubois. That'd be a lovely fight. I'd love to see that fight. Or maybe Filip Hrgovic or something like that. Those fights would be extraordinary. I'd love to see those. But anyways, Hrgovic, that'd be another great fight. Actually, that'd be a tremendous fight. That would be the fight to where, that could potentially earn either of them a title shot. Hrgovic versus Moses Itauma. Although I'm not quite sure if Itauma is experienced enough, I would like to see him go with somebody in the trenches, or someone that is at least highly ranked. Maybe a Danny Dubois, someone like that, in Andrew Ruiz, a Jarrell Big Baby Miller, Andrew Ruiz or something like that. Any one of those fights would be very interesting. Danny Dubois, I'd love to see those fights, but anyways, that being stated, congratulations to all the victors. I would love to see Nick Ball fight Inoue sometime within the next couple of fights. Raymond Ford, we'll see where he goes in the 130-pound weight class. I'd love to see him fight some of the top guys there. He did just recently beat a very good contender. Not a great one, but a very hard-nosed contender. Someone that did give some of the best a very tough fight. So you have to give Raymond Ford a lot of credit for that. Once again, would love to see Nick Ball against Inoue, and also Inoue against Nakatani. And we're going to see him against Akhmadaliev next. Filip Hrgovic, I'm not quite sure who he's going to face next, but it'll be interesting. Maybe a rematch against Danny Dubois. I'd love to see that. And as for Moses Itauma, we'll see where he goes as well. I feel like I might be missing one, but I'm not really quite sure. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later, and let me know what y'all thought.